before we have our message, I would like to introduce, it gives me a privilege to introduce our guest speaker for today, Reverend Beverly Saunders Biddle. Yeah, you can clap, you can clap. Yeah, this is one of our own. Affectionately known to us as Rev Bev, Reverend Beverly Saunders Biddle has been a faithful member of our church family since 1988. She has served in many capacities as former president of our board, on staff, as director of spiritual programs, and as a longtime member of our wonderful choir. Following a career in healthcare management, Rev Bev answered the call to ministry and was ordained in 2003 as a minister of spiritual consciousness and anointed as a minister of enlightenment. She continues to serve this congregation as a speaker, teacher, and facilitator, and the co-coordinator of our lay leaders program. Yay, give it up for the lay leaders. Yay. And still singing God's praises in our wonderful choir. Yes, hear, hear, yes, yes. So this is a busy lady, everyone. Rev Bev loves God and loves to serve with a grateful and joy-filled heart. So for our message, which will end in meditation today, let's give a warm unity welcome to our own, my sister, Rev Bev.
Good morning, family. Oh, and choir. Singing right along with you. And BG, and where's Jason? Well, my cousin. There you go. Yeah. You see, because Saunders' last name is Brown, so everybody named Brown is our cousin. So, just don't get it twisted. And I'm grateful that my sister, Renee, acknowledged our veterans, because I was going to do that. As a daughter of a military family, I would have been remiss if I had not acknowledged that today is actually Veterans Day. You know, that it became a national holiday in 1938, but it was originally Armistice Day in 1919, and then became Veterans Day in 1926. And we acknowledge all veterans, living and surviving, who have given of themselves. So I'm grateful. So I'm sure you looked at your bulletin and said, what is that? So I know my professor back there knows, but we'll get to that. So our message this morning is about moving beyond what are oftentimes are just an intellectual understanding of oneness. You know, our reverend goes to Oneness University every year, or sometimes several times, and she talks about oneness all the time, and we think, you know, that we understand what oneness is. So we want to move to a true embracing of our connection to not just each other, but to all life, including perhaps a broader vision of what life is. Okay, so are we ready for that? Yes. Okay, all right. So I've been shaken lately by the recent acts of violence, and I'm sure many of us have been as well, the mass murders and the growing number of individual lives that have been just snuffed out each day in our cities and in our communities, and not just the physical violence, but the emotional and intellectual and sexual assaults that just seem to be happening over and over. I don't know if it's because they're reported more often now, but it just seems like each day there's a new report or a new revelation. Yes? Okay. So originally, when our dear Rev, called me and said, Rev Bev, would you speak? I was, how we think. A message came, and I was going to do something to build on her message about living from the heart and talk about heart, head, and hands, which are pillars of servant leadership. and tie it into veterans and to our celebration this Friday of all of our volunteers. If you've volunteered for this ministry, please stand in any capacity. Thank you. Because, we wouldn't have what we have if it weren't for the people who give of themselves so lovingly and freely and willingly. And we get to celebrate with ourselves, at the volunteer dinner, yet the congregation needs to know who's doing the work here. So I thought that I would, build on that and talk about servant leadership. And then I had to pivot. God, sometimes we just need to shift. And this message emerged. So I pray that it's a blessing to all of us. Do you ever wonder how we got here? Are you saying, where is here? How we came to this place of seeing the other rather than seeing our brothers and sisters as ourselves. We see the other in animal species as well, rather than our oneness with all life. And we see ourselves oftentimes as the other in our relation to God or spirit or creator. And we know intellectually that our elder brother and way shower, Jesus the Christ, taught us and said, I and the Father are one. And we accept that. It's in Scripture. Yet, do we really believe that as the truth about who we are? That we are truly one with God? Do we actively live from a place of knowing that this is indeed the truth? Or is it just lip service and something we say at church because it sounds good? Yeah, it sounds good. And how many of us feel a true kinship with our brothers and sisters, much less with different animal species? And let's not even go and get into the plants and the trees and those so-called inanimate objects, like the rocks and the minerals. Do we feel at one with them? Or do we just kick them, as we're walking down the street? Here's a rock, let's kick it. Kick it on down the road. We profess our oneness, yet for many of us, again, it's that intellectual exercise. And notice that this is not in any way an indictment, because I'm including myself in it too. I'm always including myself. Like I say, I'm talking to myself, you're eavesdropping, and it's okay, all right? So the question is, do we really get that we're one with all life? All life. Not that sentimentality love, but our inner beingness, deep within us, that we are connected, and knowing and trusting who we are and whose we are, that God is in everything, which means that we must be connected to everything. Yes? So how did we get here? This place in which we've accepted and bought into this sense of separation that makes it so easy to take another life or to turn a blind eye when we hear yet another and another and another report. Now, let me be clear, I'm not in any way saying that anyone in here is out there taking lives. Don't get upset, okay? I'm not saying that at all. I'm not saying that we're out there hurting other people physically. What I am saying is that when we hear it so often, that we kind of build up something inside of ourselves where we're not, or perhaps not, as moved as we can be. We kind of build a bit of a thick skin, And we then continue to feast on TV shows and movies and video games and all of those things where violence is so rampant. Yes? And it's entertainment. You know, I watch FBI. I watch all of that. I watch, you know, Chicago PD. Hey! I'm just saying that because life is consciousness, there's an element of us within those who commit such heinous acts. And that's the hard lesson that we often try to avoid. So why today's title? Mitakuye Oyasin. It's a Lakota. Let's see if I can say it the way they say it. A Lakota. I can't quite get it. It's a Lakota Sioux phrase that means all my relations. It conveys a belief and even more a spiritual premise or a worldview that we're all interconnected. We're all part of one community, all living beings, even animals, fishes, birds, plants, trees, flowers, and yes, the rock and the mineral people, one with the Great Spirit, one with the spirit world, and one with Mother Earth, who is seen as a living, breathing being, not something to be destroyed. Many of us in Western society have lost our connection with our ancestral heritage. For many of us, it was beaten out of us centuries ago under the lash. For others, or almost all of us, there's been this adoption of a belief in separation, which fostered a focus on the individual ego. You know, it's all about me. Isn't it? It's all about me. And the belief in a God outside of ourselves. It's often said, though, that in order to know where we're going, we must know from whence we've come. And even though we may neither be aware or connected to our ancestral history and roots, they're a part of our DNA. And we get to honor that part of us. The world's primal or indigenous spiritual traditions existed long before the advent of the written traditions that we call the major world religions: Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism. Who did I leave out? Taoism. The primal traditions existed in all, okay. That's why I don't wear it often, because it does its own thing. The primal traditions existed long before these other traditions and in every part of the world. However, as a result of colonization and modernization and fundamentalist crusades by the major religions, a lot of them have been snuffed out, just totally wiped away. Yet there are still many that have survived, because most of them were oral traditions. And through the tenacity of the people, through the resiliency of the people, and then the work of anthropologists and scholars, a lot of it still does survive. And one of those traditions is the Lakota Sioux tradition. So while we can't make sweeping generalizations about all of these, because we're talking about over 250 million indigenous people in the world, probably more than that, but those that are existing right now. These were peoples and tribes from North, Central, and South America, from the African continent, from Southeast Asia and the Pacific Islands and Siberia. There are some similarities. First is that recognition of that interconnectedness of all creation, a belief that all life is equal. A primary concern for the long-term welfare of life rather than short-term expediency and comfort. That spirituality undergirded everything. It's a way of life as opposed to something that we do on Sunday or Saturday, depending on your tradition. An overriding reverence for the earth and all of its inhabitants, that the earth is spirited and is living, that humans live in a network or in relationship with all that exists, that all things come from the high God, the one source of life, as gifts to us, and that the high God is known through all manifestations of life and creation. So we are still holding on. We, meaning the Lakota, that's what they say, that they're still holding on, even after and despite losing their lands and being relegated to life on reservations. Yet they hold on to their traditions, and they are beginning to recapture their native language and to receive financial support to regain their sacred lands in the Black Hills and to preserve their attachment to the land as life. You know, they're horse people, and they have a relationship with the horses. I watched the video, and I encourage you to just see how they relate to horses. They just see them as part of themselves. So in Genesis, man was given dominion over every living thing, yes? And we all know this scripture. And I'm reading from the New Revised Standard Version of the Bible, which is used at Unity Village. I'm reading Genesis 1:26 through 28. Then God said, "Let us make humankind in our image, according to our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the wild animals of the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth." So God created humankind in his image, and in the image of God he created them. Male and female he created them. God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves upon the earth." So this has been taken very literally. Man has taken it to an extreme almost, in terms of the understanding of what it means to take dominion. It's been interpreted as having supreme authority over and taking absolute ownership. Lands have been subdued, along with the rightful inhabitants and natural resources therein. Animals have been taken for food, clothing, and other purposes, including sport. The divine connection to human, animal, plant, and mineral nations has not been honored. And this is so unlike how our founder, the founder of the Unity movement, Charles Fillmore, describes dominion. In the Revealing Word, he wrote, "As a perfect child of God, man is born to complete dominion over all creation. Dominion is an inner consciousness, obtained only through mind discipline. This supreme authority comes as man realizes his oneness with the Father. This realization prevents us from seeing each other as the other." And I couldn't find another word, without saying each other, because I don't want it to be the other. So help me, those linguists out there. It prevents us from seeing the other as alien to ourselves. If I'm one with the Father, and you're one with the Father, then we are one with each other. Logic, right? And when we can fully embrace this, we come into a place of peace and harmony within ourselves and see each other, our neighbors, not as strangers or intruders or threats. As the powerful creators that God has made us, we have misused our privilege and created a realm of error thought, which has separated us in consciousness from the Father, and then, of course, has separated us from each other and from certain aspects of ourselves that we don't like, that we've misowned, that we've judged. So we're disjointed within ourselves, which creates all of this confusion out in the outer. When we can fully embrace ourselves, we can fully see our brothers and sisters in the same light. We can get to the place where we can say, I am not my brother's keeper, I am my brother. I am not my sister's keeper, I am my sister. One of the many books that supported me in shifting in consciousness is Love Without Conditions by Paul Ferrini. And again, don't go run into the bookstore. I don't know if it's there. But in it, he writes, each of us has a tiny spark of light that illuminates the darkness of our consciousness. This is the divine spark of awareness which keeps our connection with God alive. This spark also connects us to the divine teacher in our tradition and to the divinity within our brothers and sisters. Were we to see only that spark of light within each of us, all darkness in our perception and experience would dissolve, and the world as we know it would disappear. This is how love is established in our own heart and in the hearts of our brothers and sisters. And he goes on later. A follower of Jesus does not advocate any kind of separation. He practices love and forgiveness for all beings. A true follower of Jesus knows that God has many ways of bringing us home and never doubts the outcome. Indeed, he stands against all authority save God's. He asks merely that we take his hand as an equal and that we reach out to each one of our brothers and sisters with the same mutual respect and intention of equality. His teaching may be simple, but it will require all of our attention, all of our energy, all of our commitment to put it in practice. He shared that removing the ideas that give rise to perceptions and feelings of separation had to become his daily spiritual practice. It must for us as well. So in that light, I offer 3 simple steps, which are in addition to our usual cleansing of consciousness through denials and affirmations and spending time in prayer and meditation. We know these things, yes? Are we doing these things? Mm-hmm. We'll take a poll later. So, the first one is spend time each day in nature. How many of us do that? We're rushing from place to place, thing to thing, right? We can take a break from our busy lives to take a walk or sit in the yard or sit in the park. And when you can, take some extended time at the beach, in the mountains, in the valleys. You know, nature is all around us. And in that time, know that we too are part of God's masterpiece. Second is, open yourself up to the animal world. I know we have some pet lovers. Where's Floyd? Whether it's spending time with your own pet, if you don't have one, with a friend or family's pet, going to the zoo, or just observing birds or other creatures. I mean, I love when I'm driving and I see the little deer, and I say, go back, go back, go back, go back, go back, go back, and praying they hear me, go back, And we get to feel our connection with them because they are too divine creatures. And then third, spend some time gardening. Any gardeners? I'm not. I don't have a green thumb. Even if it's only a terrarium or an herb garden, or visit a community garden or a friend's garden. Marvel at the wonders of nature as food is produced from seed. And know that food is produced from the seeds that we plant in our consciousness. So I encourage each of us to take all of this to heart. And as our Rev always says, I call her Rev, as our Rev always says, we are the ones that we've been waiting for. And I say that we can be contributors to a new world order or an old order, depending on our perspective. We can realize our oneness with all life. Mitakuye Oyasin, all my relations. Blessings.